Donald Rumsfeld, the oldest and youngest Secretary of Defense in the history of the United States, a lifelong politician. He passed away a couple years ago in his late 80s, and I wanted to get into a little bit of his background in this video and kind of touch base on some of his, positions in the political sphere, but also taking a look at some of the more interesting jobs that he had in the public sector over a wide, vast variety. He was in IT, pharmaceutical companies, so I want to touch on some of those things as well. He was a four-term U.S. congressman from Illinois from 1963 to 1969. He attended Princeton University, got a degree in political science, did 3 years in the Navy. His father was also in the Navy, serving in World War II in the Pacific. After his term as congressman, he was in a position where he was counselor to the president from 1969 to 1973. I've never even heard of that position before, but Rumsfeld somehow managed to kind of, after serving in the Congress for 6 years, got the counselor to the president job, and then he was the White House chief of staff from 1974 to 1975 under Gerald Ford. President Gerald Ford, which was not his real name. He was actually born Leslie Lynch King Jr. Not sure if a lot of Americans are aware of that. I certainly was not. After that, Rumsfeld was then the White House Secretary of Defense from 1975 to 1977 under Ford, and then most people know him from his second stint as Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush from 2001, and then he resigned in 2006, and that's where most people are aware from the whole scam of the Iraqi war, the weapons of mass destruction lie, and some of the things that I covered in my last video regarding the crimes, the many crimes of Dick Cheney. And so, taking a look back, where I first became aware of Rumsfeld was back when, years back when I was kind of looking at some different things and what really happened on September 11th, and I don't really want to go too far down that rabbit hole in this video, but that's where I became, more aware of who this character is on the screen and what, he had a pretty important role in the day of 9/11 and selling it to the public. He was actually at the Pentagon when the plane allegedly hit the Pentagon on the September 11th. And so basically when he became Secretary of Defense in 2001, early in 2001, he was, because of his background in like budgeting and stuff, there was a back and forth questioning, and people, one of the senators, I think it was Senator Byrd, was asking him about, where there's all this, missing money in the Pentagon budget, and Rumsfeld was coming in to take a look at it and see where it was all going. And he was going to hire, outside third parties if necessary, to try to track this, missing what ended up being trillions of dollars. And I just want to play this clip in case anybody hadn't seen this before. This was the speech that was released the day before on September 10th, 2001, updating the public on what's going on with the Pentagon budget. Let's see what he had to say.
And the fact that they can fail and die is what provides the incentive to survive. But governments can't die. So we need to find other incentives for bureaucracy to adapt and improve. The technology revolution has transformed organizations across the private sector. But not ours, not fully, not yet. We are, as they say, tangled in our anchor chain. Our financial systems are decades old. According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions. We cannot share information from floor to floor in this building because it's stored on dozens of different technological systems that are inaccessible.
And we all know what happens the next day on September 11th. And the plane that hit the Pentagon, I mean, that's a story that's rolled out to the public, even though there's really never been any footage, at least released to the public, showing a plane hitting the Pentagon. The only footage that's been released is kind of an explosion happening off in the distance and then a hole in the Pentagon wall, which, leads to a lot of, people questioning events of that day. You have the Pentagon, which is probably one of the most secured facilities, in this earthly realm. And there's probably, I don't know, even then, probably 1,000 cameras easy in a quarter-mile radius. And yet there's no footage ever released. Anyway, so there's a hole in the wall, and Rumsfeld, for a while after the attacks, couldn't be found, and that whole story. And then he's out there, pretending to help sift through some of the debris. I think there might have been a plane wheel, sprinkled among the debris, kind of sell it more to the public as far as the legitimacy of it all. Anyway, so what ended up happening that day was that area, this is what we're told, that got hit at the Pentagon, that was the exact area where these people, the government officials, third-party contractors, were actively working on figuring where all of this missing $2.3 trillion that Rumsfeld just mentioned in this speech here, and all of the files, all of the data, everything got destroyed. So, nothing to see here, and basically, thrown down a memory hole. And the events of September 11th, the chaos of the day, and there was pretty much no further questioning of where all of our taxpayer money was going. And here is another kind of, just to show how much of kind of a cagey politician and bullshit artist this guy is. Here is a quick clip of Rumsfeld just spitting total word salad here. Interesting. Here we go.
Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
There you go. Did you catch all that? A lot of unknowns. But interesting enough, when in between his jobs in the different White House cabinets, I wanted to take a look at some of his private sector jobs. And a very, like I said, this he almost seems like he's some sort of hired gun that the system brings in to kind of when they really need something to get done here. But as you can see here, after this is in the 80s, he becomes chief executive office president and then chairman of J.D. Searle and Company, a worldwide pharmaceutical company based in his home state, Skokie, Illinois. During his tenure at Searle, Rumsfeld led the company's financial turnaround, earning these awards. And then you see here this journalist from Harper's Magazine claimed that Rumsfeld suppressed news that Searle's key product, aspartame, was shown to have potentially dangerous effects by leveraging old government contacts at the FDA. And then you see this move a lot here with these companies when there starts to become a bit blowback on them and there's too much public outcry. You'll see this where some other corrupted conglomerate comes in and buys them out and kind of, pushes them off the public off the scent. But as it says here, in 1985, Searle was sold to a company most people are fully aware of, and the poisoning of the American public for many decades. That's Monsanto. So Monsanto comes in 1985 and purchases him. He was also, we're going to get into the Searle thing in a second here, but he then goes on, he was the chairman, CEO of General Instrument from 1990 to 1993. And so now he's in the kind of the technology world, the IT world, a leader in broadband transmission, distribution, and access control technologies for cable, satellite. The company basically, they were the first ones pioneering the development of the first HD television and made a shitload of money. I'm sure Rumsfeld gets a nice, nice package as he's leaving the door, millions of dollars. And he was also the chairman of Gilead Services, the developer of Tamiflu, which is used in the treatment of bird flu as well as influenza A and B. As a result, Rumsfeld holdings in the company grew significantly when avian flu became a subject of public anxiety, during his latter term as Secretary of Defense. And I'm sure, following standard practice, Rumsfeld recused himself from any decisions involving Gilead, and he directed the Pentagon's general, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sure. So he then goes to a company. This company comes up with, Tamiflu, which is the treatment of bird flu. And then, lo and behold, what happens after that? The boogeyman appears, and the public is terrified with the avian bird flu. And I'm sure standard practice, yeah, I'm sure that was really closely followed there. And so he then makes his buddies at the board millions of dollars in revenue, while they're, I'm sure, poisoning the public, whatever they're releasing. And he moves on. So you can see, he comes in, CEO, different companies, pharmaceutical companies, technology companies. I mean, it's just fascinating. But I did want to get into the whole aspartame thing, because this is kind of I find it fascinating kind of case study on the control system and their just relentless kind of just a pathetic desperation to poison us. And this was a time back in the 80s when, well, in my opinion, the food supply, just speaking of America here, has probably always been poison. But it seems they started to really ratchet up the different types of poisons in the 80s and 90s. And especially that's when a lot of these processed foods really started to become, half the grocery store. Now it's probably 80% of it. Where, if you opened a bag of chips, the same chips today from, compared to 1985, I mean, they were never good for us, but it seems like they're much more weaponized now, double the amount of ingredients. Nobody knows what half the shit is. But this is an article from back in 2000 and early 2000s, and I remember the aspartame thing in the 80s and how it started to appear in all of the, sodas and stuff and the diet sodas. But I just view this through the kind of the lens of, how they call in Rumsfeld to run this company, and his goal is to, no matter how long it takes, resources is not the issue. We're the people printing the money, and how, they're just going to keep coming and coming to get this compound aspartame into the food supply, come hell or high water, basically. But it starts off, and I'm just going to read some of this here. Many health-conscious people believe that avoiding aspartame, found in over 5,000 products under brand names such as Equal and NutraSeek, can improve their quality of life. The history of this synthetic sweetener's approval by the FDA, including a long record of consumer complaints and the agency's demonstrated insensitivity to public concern, suggests they're right. And it just goes through kind of the timeline here of how long this went on for them to try to get this poison, this neurotoxin, approved. In October 1980, the PBOI, the Public Board of Inquiry, impaneled by the FDA to evaluate aspartame safety, found that the chemical caused an unacceptable level of brain tumors in animal testing. Based on this fact, the PBOI ruled that aspartame should not be added to the food supply. And you would think that that would, end it there, but it didn't. The ruling capped 15 years of regulatory ineptitude, deception by the FDA and the Searle Drug Company, aspartame's discoverer and manufacturer, acquired by Monsanto in 1985, and kicked off another 2 decades of maneuvering, manipulating, and dissembling by FDA, Searle, and Monsanto. And it talks here about how basically, back in the 60s, Searle scientists, while he was making medicine for ulcer sufferers, discovered aspartame, and as a chemical, basically that was the moment where they were like, well, we need to get this into the food supply. Searle, a drug company with little experiments in food regulation, began studies to comply with the law, but which failed to do so. Its early tests of the substance showed it produced microscopic holes and tumors in the brains of experimental mice, epileptic seizures in monkeys, and was converted by animals into dangerous substances, including formaldehyde. That's great. That's really nice. In 1974, however, in spite of the information in its files, the FDA approved aspartame as a dry foods additive, but the agency also made public for the first time the data supporting a food additive decision. This data was reviewed by brain researcher John Olney from Washington State. Dr. Olney discovered 2 studies showing brain tumors in rats and petitioned FDA for public hearing. Consumer Actions for Improved Foods and Drugs, represented by the author of this piece, also petitioned for a public hearing based on the approval process having been based on sloppy science and the products having reportedly caused epileptic seizures in monkeys and possible eye damage. Dr. Olney had already shown that aspartic acid, a component of aspartame, caused holes in the brains of rats after each feeding. It also causes PKU in small children, and methyl or wood alcohol, which is a neurotoxic in large amounts. Faced with an array of health dangers, FDA granted the hearing requests. In lieu of withdrawing its aspartame approval, the agency prevailed on Searle to refrain from marketing this sweetener until after completion of the hearing. It then proposed that a public board you would think at this point it would just, somebody in the FDA, somebody would have just shut this down. Like, this stuff is, this is never going to be approved. This is clearly a toxic. It's causing holes in brain, seizures. If that's not enough to just completely shut it down, but no, they were hell-bent on getting this into the food supply. In July of 1975, as the FDA prepared for the PBOI, an FDA inspector conducted a review of the Searle's testing facilities and found many deviations from proper procedures. This report led the FDA commissioner to expand the special task force to review Searle's labs. In December of 75, the task force reported serious problems with the research on a wide range of products, including aspartame, and found 11 pivotal studies conducted in a manner so flawed as to raise doubts about aspartame safety and create the possibility of liability. And when you see that, to me, like when these studies conducted in such a manner so flawed, like they are basically conforming the study, as sloppy as it ends up being, around what they're truly finding and how much this stuff is poisoning. And it's just a way for them to, you would think, how is it possible that a pharmaceutical company with all its resources at its disposal can come up with such shitty tests or studies? Anyway, back to the article here. The FDA then stayed aspartame's approval. It also contracted over serious internal objection with a group of university pathologists paid by the drug company to review most of the studies, set up a task force to review 3 studies, and asked the U.S. Attorney for Chicago to seek a grand jury to review the monkey seizure study. The pathologist paid by Searle only reviewed failure to properly report data and not the study's design or conduct. They found no serious problems. The FDA task force found Searle's key tumor safety study unreliable but was ignored. The U.S. Attorney let the statute of limitations run out and then, along with 2 aides, proceeded to join Searle's law firm. So, and you see this over and over, this revolving door. Obviously, the Attorney General was on the take, and I'm sure him and his 2 aides were rewarded with some pallets of cash in their garage. When these committees met, the FDA organized PBOI, Searle, the petitioners, and the FDA, which each nominated 3 members of the board, and the FDA commissioners selected 1 member from each list. The board, which convened in 1980, rejected the request to include the commissioner's task force information to its deliberations. Still, in October 1980, based on its limited review, the board blocked aspartame marketing until the tumor studies could be explained. So they shot down again. However, and this is where Rumsfeld comes in. So this is where, and again, he's playing both sides. At the time, he is the CEO of this pharmaceutical company, but then at the same time, in November 1980, Reagan gets into office. Rumsfeld, former congressman from Skokie, former White House chief of staff, Secretary of Defense, joined the Reagan transition team. A full court press against the board decision began. And then the fixer comes in. January of 81, Rumsfeld told a sales meeting, according to an attendee, that he would call in his chips and get aspartame approved by the end of the year. On January 25th, Reagan gets inaugurated. The previous FDA commissioner's authority was suspended, and the next month the commissioner's job went to Dr. Arthur Hayes. Transition records do not show why the administration chose Hayes, a professor and Defense Department contract researcher. In July, Hayes, defying FDA advisors, approved aspartame for dry foods, its first major decision. In November 1983, the FDA approved aspartame for soft drinks, Hayes' last decision. And, there was some public outcry. In November of 83, Hayes, under fire for accepting corporate gifts, left the agency, went to Searle's public relations firm as senior medical advisor. Later, Searle lawyer Robert Shapiro named aspartame NutraSweet, again with the name changes. Monsanto purchased Searle. Rumsfeld pockets his $12 million, and nobody's held accountable. Nobody gets arrested. Nothing happens. Just the public has a new poison to deal with. Shortly after the FDA soft drink approval, Searle began test marketing. Complaints began to arrive at the FDA with such reaction as dizziness, blurred vision, headaches, seizures. The complaints were more serious than the agency had ever received on any food additive. At the same time, the scientists began looking more closely at this manufactured chemical sweetener. In 1985, the FDA asked the CDC to review the first 650 complaints. CDC found that the symptoms in approximately a quarter of the complainants had stopped and then restarted, corresponding with their having stopped and restarted, either purposely or by accident, their aspartame consumption. And it goes on and on here about, they're doing all these studies and how toxic this compound was. But it didn't matter. Once they got approved and, going at it for years and years and years, they get it into the food supply, food additive, then it's added, into drinks, and basically the pathetic desperation is on full display to get this, in every American home, on all of our dinner plates, and all of the, drinks that we're drinking. And just take, I'm not going to go into any of these other here, and I knew aspartame was bad, but and it's pretty crazy looking at just some of these headlines here about, aspartame and MS, a neurosurgeon's warning, dropping like flies, poisoned by aspartame, and your, vision going to shit. Aspartame detoxification program, and it just goes on and on and on. And they'll rename it, they'll do whatever, and then usually the scam is, with a lot of these things, they let it poison the public for as long as possible until there's enough backlash, and then they play dumb. It's a game of hot potato. Well, we didn't know it was, maybe it was this company's fault, or basically what happens, nobody gets held accountable, and the most that will ever happen is one of these billion-dollar companies, will get fined, and so, but nobody ever gets arrested, or there's no actual, legitimate investigation into any of this stuff. But, I just find that, interesting how this guy Rumsfeld is goes from, it just shows that there isn't any difference between, the governments at the federal level and these White House positions and these billion-dollar companies. I mean, they're all the same thing, and he shows that right here with him, going from CEO and then right into Reagan's White House, and the fix is in. But a lot of these politicians, these lifelong politicians, they're all controlled, in my opinion, one way or the other, by blackmail, compromise. Who knows? But Rumsfeld is a very interesting guy because of, is this, he's obviously a smart guy, and he knows, I mean, he's not going to admit this, but he knows on some level, just take the aspartame thing, that, this is going to be poisoning the public, and potentially ruining people's lives, and the collateral damage that has on society. And there's really no way to quantify it. And is this guy is it just, he's aware of it, but he just doesn't care. And he's just, oh, well, I'm making, millions of dollars, 12 million from this pharmaceutical company, 10 million from another. And it's just doesn't seem to have any sign of a conscience. I mean, I don't understand how that doesn't, knowing what you're doing is affecting a bunch of people that you don't even know, how that doesn't keep you up at night.